Welcome back, everyone. We are going to finish up our discussion of fallacies. Remember, fallacies are errors or mistakes in logic. We've gone over a bunch, and we're going to do one more batch, starting with circular reasoning, also known as begging the question. So let's get started. In this fallacy, you're trying to prove something, and you actually end up assuming or taking for granted what it is you're trying to prove. If you assume what you're trying to prove, you're guilty of begging the question, also known as circular reasoning, because your endpoint is the same as your starting point. And if you reason like that, you're reasoning in a circle. Let's clear it up with an example. So suppose we take a class field trip and we get one of those really long stretch limos, like a stretch Hummer or something. And as we're walking to go get picked up, one of you exclaims, "I call shotgun," which, if you know what shotgun means, it's the person's calling the front seat. They want to sit in the front seat of this long limo for whatever reason. And let's say that we're not that close to the limo. I don't know if there are rules to the game of shotgun, or if any people still use this term. They used it when I was younger. Maybe it still exists. But one of the common rules is that you have to be near the car, or you have to be within sight of the car. You can't call shotgun like the day before a trip or something. And so one of you says, wait a second, we're too far away from the limo. You can't call shotgun. Why do you think you should get shotgun? And the person, they don't say it's because I can see it, we're actually getting close. They say, well, I think I'm the best in this class. I think I'm the number one student. I'm the best. And so I think because I'm the best, I should be able to sit in the front seat. And being the good students of logic that we are, we don't just accept this at face value. We push back. And one of you says, well, what makes you think you're the best? What, like your grades or something, or like your discussion post, or why should we think you're the best? What's your argument for you're the best? And then they quip back, well, clearly I'm the best because I'm the person who's about to sit shotgun. And the circle begins. So you can see the reasoning. They say that they get to sit in the front seat because they're the best. Why are they the best? Because they get to sit in the front seat. Why do you get to sit in the front seat? Because you're the best. Why are you the best? And round we go. So that's circular logic. That's begging the question. Let's do one more example. Let's say you are having a debate with someone, a theological debate about whether or not God exists. And you're talking to someone who's a believer, and then you push them and you inquire, well, what's your argument? What's your reason or reasons for why you believe in God? And they say, well, my conclusion is that God exists, and my evidence is that God is mentioned or described or talked about in this sacred text. Say it's the Bible. God's existence is implied by the fact that God is mentioned in the Bible. And further, the Bible is the word of God. Everything that's in the Bible is absolutely true. So says this believer. And it cannot be incorrect. Now, if we left it there, then this person seems like they're on to something. However, being the good students of logic that we are, we push back once more. We say, well, wait a second. If I grant you these premises, if we assume that the Bible is truth and the Bible talks about this creator deity, this being, this God, well, then yes, it would follow that God exists. But I want to question this premise right here. Why should we accept that the Bible is infallible? Why can it not be wrong? Why is it the absolute truth? Now the person could go somewhere else, could attempt to provide some satisfactory answer for that. However, if they merely say that something like, well, the Bible can't be wrong because it was written by God. It's the word of God. I mean, I guess they kind of do say it here. So the circularity is already there. That's a problem because you see this line right here presupposes the existence of God. So they've, in a very sneakily way, they've smuggled in their conclusion. It's contained in one of the premises. So if we don't question this premise, then we already have the existence of God built into it. The Bible is the word of God. That presumes the existence of God, but that's precisely what you're trying to prove. You cannot presume what you're trying to prove. You cannot presume that in one of your premises. You have to appeal to something or some information or some evidence that's outside of your conclusion. So that's begging the question. This next one's a fun one. It's called false dichotomy. It's when you are, well, we can just read right here. It's when somebody assumes that there are fewer options than there actually are. So usually the way this goes is you're presented with two options and you're led to believe that there are no alternatives to these two options. You got to go with, say, A or B, and that's the end of the story. There's no alternative. There's no third option or fourth option, let's say. So the fallacy occurs when this is mistaken, when there actually are other options. But you are told, or you are led to believe, that there are not. This is also known as a false choice or a false dilemma. So choice, dilemma, dichotomy, different ways of saying the same thing. How many of you are servers or waiters or waitresses, or you've worked in restaurants? Probably a good number of you. When I was in the summers in high school, I worked as a busser at a Mexican restaurant, and so I didn't make it up to server. I guess maybe I was just like a little bit young for that. They would a lot of the be more like the 18-year-olds and older people that did that. But in any case, often a server when you're seated, what's the first thing that they say to you? You can pause and think about it. What's the first thing a server says when you sit down? A lot of times they'll say something like, "Hi, my name is so and so. Can I get you started with a drink or an appetizer?" Something like that. And it's not like they are trying to dupe you and try to sell you things you don't want, because a lot of people, they come and they're hungry or they want a drink, and so these things can come fast. And also, they want something to do while they wait for the meal. So it's not completely underhanded, but this is a tactic, especially by chain restaurants, so like a Chili's or an Outback Steakhouse or an Applebee's, something like that. The managers, coming down from corporate, this is actually like a requirement. And they might even go one step further and push their most expensive appetizer or drink. "Hi, my name is Ryan. Welcome to Applebee's. Can I get you started with an Awesome Blossom or our El Presidente margarita?" And if you look at the menu, it's like, holy crap, this appetizer is $17.99, right? And this cocktail drink, this is a $13 cocktail. What's going on? And they can sell you the more expensive things. That's good for business. It's good for tips. And they don't mention the most common and free options. Like when I was in high school, I never ordered well, you get, obviously drinks are alcoholic, those were off the table, but I never ordered appetizers because they were so expensive, to like a 16 or 17-year-old. Money doesn't grow on trees. So I would just like, I could see right through that. Like, no, I don't want your $17 potato explosion appetizer. Um, and drink wise, they never say, would you like a glass of water to start, because that doesn't help business too much. And or just would you like nothing? That's the most common option, and it's the free one. You guys know I like The Office, so here are a couple more examples from The Office. So the Dwight character in that show, he is at a cocktail party or a house party at the COO's house, the David Wallace character, and he just is like snooping around the house. Eventually, he ends up going through their trash, and he finds coffee grounds, which is totally innocuous. Like that's perfectly fine, no big deal if you find that in someone's trash. That's not very suspicious. But of course, Dwight, being the volunteer sheriff, says coffee grounds. Was he enjoying a hot beverage or masking the scent of smuggled cocaine? Right. So that's a false dilemma because there are lots of other options, right? I mean, it's probably this first one, but it could have been, the second one is like smuggled in there. Here's an even better example. Another episode of The Office, a Christmas episode. Michael Scott is upset because for the first time, he doesn't get to dress up as Santa. They give that honor to Phyllis, one of the salespeople. And so Michael, he just needs to be the center of attention, and he kind of has the temperament of like a 7-year-old. So to protest, he's pouting, and so he turns his Santa costume inside out, and it looks like this white robe, and he drops his beard down, and he comes out and he goes, "Behold, I am Jesus Christ." And then Toby, the HR guy, if you're familiar with the show, the animosity that Michael has for Toby. Toby says, "Michael, this is so inappropriate. You can't push religion on people. This is an office." And then Michael, here's the false dichotomy. It's like, if I can't push religion, then I can push drugs. It's one or the other. It's your choice, which of course is a false dichotomy. It's like, you could do neither. What do you mean we have to choose between the boss of the office pushing drugs on people or pushing religion? No, it doesn't have to be. It's one or the other. That's why it's so funny. It's because it's just such a blatant false dichotomy. All right, let's practice finding these fallacies and some of the ones from a previous video lecture in 331 and 3. So let's go to 331 here. 3311, that is. So we're identifying the fallacies of weak induction. So that's the type of fallacies we've been looking at. And some of these will have no fallacy. That's why these can be tricky, is because that's always a possibility, is that the reasoning is sound, or there's just no bad reasoning present. So we'll have to be on the lookout for that. The Daily News carried an article this morning about 3 local teenagers who were arrested on charges of drug possession. Teenagers these days are nothing but a bunch of junkies. So what does that sound like to you? Well, this is too small a sample, right? Just because 3 teenagers weren't making the best decision, we cannot generalize to all teenagers. So this sounds like a hasty generalization to me. And we can see it is. Next one. The secretaries have asked us to provide lounge areas where they can spend their coffee breaks. Okay, that seems fair. This request will have to be refused. Oh no, why? If we give them lounge areas, next they'll be asking for spas and swimming pools. Well, that's quite a leap, isn't it? That seems like a slippery slope or false cause. And then if we it'll be racquetball courts, tennis courts, fitness centers. Expenditures for these facilities will drive us into bankruptcies. So the book calls this slippery slope. Like I said, slippery slope. And the example we gave earlier in an earlier lecture was, a parent thinks that letting their teenager on a date is going to lead to teen pregnancy and divorce and, STDs and things like that, or that legalizing marijuana means that all drugs will be legal before you know it. It's perfectly reasonable to think that a state, like California legalized marijuana, but that doesn't mean that we're on the fast track to legalizing all drugs. That might not even happen. It could happen, but it's not necessarily going to happen. It's not even likely to happen necessarily in our lifetime. No one has ever been able to prove the existence of extrasensory perception, ESP. We must therefore conclude that extrasensory perception is a myth. So this is clearly an appeal to ignorance. Just because there's no counterproof, that's not evidence that we are correct. So just because no one has ruled out the existence of ESP, that doesn't guarantee that it exists. So this is an appeal to ignorance. This is a tricky one, so let's pay close attention. Probably no life exists on Venus. So Venus, I think, is the closest planet to Earth. You might say, well, why don't we go to Venus instead of Mars? It's very hot. Mars is, you can we landed the Mars rover, and it's not going to like instantly burn up if we send it to Venus. Be some temperature issues. Teams of scientists have conducted exhaustive studies of the planet's surface and atmosphere, and no living organisms have been found. I don't think that there's a fallacy there. I mean, I think that this is a good piece of reasoning. If it's true, if we take for granted that it's been thoroughly investigated by these teams of scientists, and so far we haven't found any life. Now, does that guarantee there's no life? No, but the conclusion is probably no life exists on Venus. So this is a good argument. It's good reasoning. It's not trying to be a conclusive proof. It's not trying to be a sound deductive argument. It's just presenting itself as an inductive argument, and a good one at that, an argument that is going for probabilistic reasoning. So no fallacy there. No one should buy clothing at a department store without first trying it on. Okay, that seems a reasonable start. Where do we go from here? Accordingly, notice that this is a conclusion indicator. Accordingly, no one should buy food at a grocery store without first tasting it. Well, that's not a very good analogy, right? So that's a weak analogy. The sample and the target, the things that we are comparing, you're comparing trying on clothes versus trying on food. Yes, both places are in the marketplace. You go to buy clothes at the store, you go to buy food at the store. So there's some similarity, but they're not relevantly similar. So that is a weak analogy, not a good analogy between these two things. And then we have one more appeal to ignorance. No one has proved conclusively that America's nuclear power plants constitute a danger to people living in the immediate vicinity. Therefore, it's perfectly safe to continue to build nuclear power plants near large metropolitan areas. Well, just because we haven't conclusively ruled out a danger, that doesn't mean that's not there. It still could be there. So we are appealing to ignorance here. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, it is sometimes said to describe this appeal to ignorance. Okay, great. Let's do some more fallacies, and then we can practice. Okay. The perfectionist fallacy, this is not discussed in our textbook, but it's a specific kind of false dichotomy. But instead of presenting two options when they're in fact a third or fourth option, it's when you're presented with one option, like it's the be-all end-all option, and in fact there is another option. And this is the idea of I want perfection. I want 100%. And anything short of that is worthless. And that kind of thinking can get you into trouble because if you're not perfect, you still can be very good. So if you don't get 100%, say on an exam, let's say you get a 93 or 94. Okay, it's not perfect, but that's still pretty darn good. But to brush off or to scoff at, a 93 on an exam, that's being a little too demanding. Not being happy with anything less than perfection when falling short a little is just fine. Think about people who try to eat healthy. You're on a trying to change your diet to eat healthier. And people who have this perfectionist mentality, and it's almost or is a personality trait. You might describe yourself as a perfectionist. I think I have that mentality to a certain degree. And so let's say someone's trying to eat healthy, and let's say they go 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, and they've got this great track record. They are on a good run. They're doing it. They're eating healthy. Day 1, day 2, week 1, week 2, week 3, and then they slip up. They have a moment of weakness, and they have a donut or a cheeseburger or something not so healthy, and then they just kind of collapse, or they throw their hands up and say, well, that was a good run, and they just kind of will go binge after that. Well, if I can't eat a perfectly nutritious eat in a perfectly nutritious way, then F it, screw it, and then binge. And it seems when you describe it, almost seems like still like, what's the big deal? Okay, you had one donut, you had one, you know, cheeseburger, giant cheeseburger, or Big Mac or something. What's the big deal? But it's funny how this is like how it just psychologically impacts us. It's like, well, it's all or nothing. It's that all or nothing thinking. That's another way to think about perfectionist fallacy. Also related to false dichotomy is the line drawing fallacy. And it's when you draw a line in the sand when it's really not called for. It's really not appropriate. It's really unnecessary. It's not needed. So I say here the cookie example. What does that mean? Well,